So last week, we were able to address a few logical fallacies that are happening in the comment sections. And yet this week, people came in with more and more absurd arguments. And thus, we're going to take some time here to address, well, not all of them, but what we figure is a good portion of them. So let's start. Loyalty, part dose. Now, in the past week, you've seen some folks take to their social media to talk a little bit about loyalty and why they're specifically loyal to ADCC. And I can actually understand that sentiment. However, I would note that the way that they're written comes off overtly dramatic and from a place of moral superiority. See, loyalty is a two-way street. So to expect it or demand it when a better offer exists seems kind of disloyal to me. And it highlights a slight problem in conflating personal relationships with the promoter with the professional and business sides. See, when that line is blurred, it's not surprising that arguments find their way into the fold like this. That's where I believe the professionalism comes in. Similar to any job, you get a better offer, you give notice, and wish the other entity well. I would agree that money isn't necessarily everything when it comes to relationships, but treating the issue of money like nothing and downplaying the legitimate requests about the financials that were proposed about the business model also caused ADCC to kind of burn their relationship with Craig. I'm just so curious why it is that just questioning the business practices of an organization maybe is a bad thing and might also highlight a one-way relationship in that dynamic. And this last part is not particularly directed at anyone in particular here. It's just, it should go without saying that loyalty is often used in our sport to control and manipulate people. So perhaps not the best argument in this sport. Another argument, I hate that they're making the athletes choose. It's like we found people who never use their paid time off for work because the company will one day acknowledge their grind. We have so many people who like competition and free market and money who all of a sudden heavily dislike the option of choice. Imagine waiting years, decades, just to get some kind of opportunity for life-changing money. And their response is, could it be at a more convenient time for me? Also, there's no contract with ADCC. So basically, you're shaming your friends for trying to leave one job because they got a better deal or offer, or to continue an earlier point, exploiting a relationship for a business practice. Most jobs tell you it's courteous to give 2 weeks notice. Last I looked, it's about 70 days away. So that's more than ample time. Additionally, a quick history lesson here, kids. EBI was literally launched after the success of Eddie Bravo competing at Metamoris 3. Then they created an organization. Those two organizations went and competed against one another. And guess what? It was beneficial for all of us. And yes, there was counter programming back then too. Holic actually programmed a Metamoris Underground a day before EBI and 2 days before one of the Submission Underground events. And yet all did fairly fine for themselves. But the innovation that came out of it was people got tired of seeing draws. So they ended up creating overtime, thus EBI overtime. I believe that competition breeded innovation at that time, and we desperately needed it. And if you look at just this past weekend, when we celebrated the 10th anniversary of EBI, it was during the weekend of Worlds, and both existed just fine. Worlds was packed. EBI was packed. That was a great thing for Jiu-Jitsu. I think what the pro ADCC crowd needs to get into their head is that if they can get away from their egos, they will realize this is a huge windfall for them. There is going to be a free YouTube product that will completely outdraw their pay-per-view model. So there will be a lot of eyes on that product that week. They might be more intrigued because of the drama. There's only 1 day of overlap here. And yes, some of the athletes are going to have to choose, are given a choice to figure out which one they want to go to. And that is the stuff of drama that makes storytelling, that gets people interested in finding out what happens that Sunday. Because if you know the story of the Craig Jones Invitational, you have to know what's going on with ADCC. If they could somehow learn how to mitigate that and manage it, they will then only have to give a great platform to the athletes, which they have in the past. But perhaps what some people just don't want to admit is that there is a strong possibility that ADCC becomes the B show. And all of that talk of choice is really just a fear-based response to the fact that come August 19th, that standard might actually change. And there is a slight possibility that ADCC may not be the pinnacle anymore. And that's what's scary. But it's not an assured thing. Craig Jones Invitational could just crash and burn. And in fact, the burden is now on them to produce a show that's both entertaining and justifies being on that same weekend. So yes, they have a lot of pressure on them too. That is this year. See, a lot of people are talking about the fact that this year will have a lot of competition. And yes, there will be competition. But if we take Craig at his word and they are looking to make it an annual event, then really next year is more interesting to me. Because then all of those people who talk about loyalty and being forced to make a choice suddenly have an off year where everything is on the table. And yes, in that time, that discrepancy or the distance between the two events could only become bigger and bigger if this event is successful. So no, I'm not surprised you're seeing some very key people put up posts to protect their interests. But as for me, color me more interested in what happens in 2025. Hey, they're making changes. You know, I was beyond thrilled to hear that Mo was going to increase the pay for women during one of Mo's most recent Instagram lives in response to a question regarding pay disparity for men and women, that he would increase the pay for women. And that is a good thing. However, it was what he said after that he raised a few eyebrows with. When he said, that doesn't mean anything to me. As in, the money increase doesn't mean much to him. At best, it's a casual slip up and perhaps something from somebody who has trouble articulating themselves on a live telecast, which is difficult to do. At worst, it makes light of an issue that means a lot to women who have been competing in that event for years, who have been relegated to second-class status. What do I mean by that? I mean that women and men compete at trials in both the East and West Coast. However, only the men go from both sides of those trials. The women do not. And that highlights a huge problem for an organization that wants to be the best in the world. Mo might actually be fronting the bill on this and paying it himself. And if that's the case, it should be commendable. But he didn't just offer to match the money out of the goodness of his heart. He did it because people were pressuring him to do it. And quite frankly, ADCC could use the good press. In this instance, choosing that same weekend has come to a very powerful point. And yes, it did help to have Craig and Fionn basically combining forces. So if you're really going to thank anybody, you should be thanking them for making meaningful change by using their platforms together. So you know what all this means? It means your "I wish it was a different weekend" argument is completely null and void now. If it was supposedly in the works, meaning a pay increase for the women or pay increase for the athletes, well, we've seen how incremental change has worked for the ADCC in the past, especially when it comes to women. And yet for some strange reason, within a week's time, we have seen the fastest change in ADCC policy when it comes to women. Almost like it could have been done at any given time. Strange. I guess the moral of the story here is efficacy works only when those in power use it appropriately. Craig and Fionn did. And at the very least, it sure as hell worked a lot faster than that supposed loyalty ever did. Oh God, Tim. Oh no.
Well, Tim is eating.
Great job, man. I enjoyed it. I loved it.